very much, Jacinta. Appreciate that. Hey, welcome, and welcome to me as well. It's great to be here. I did see on that slide that Alpha Crucis University College was like the first one. I actually didn't even notice it until my friend pointed it out, who was sitting next to me. I was like, oh, look at that. So let me get the AC stuff out of the way first. Yes, I work at Alpha Crucis University College, and we've been around for 77 years. We're the official training college of the ACC, the Australian Christian Churches, and we train people for God's kingdom work in the earth, whether that is for to become teachers or chaplains or counsellors or ministers and missionaries, etc. So I've got some brochures somewhere, and I'm happy to chat to you about it after the service. That done. Hey, let's give our worship team a hand. They did a great job. Pastor Trevor, I never knew you were so musical. Look at that, hey? Come on, that was sensational. It is such an honour to be here. I don't know if you know this, but this particular church has got a solid reputation in the state of Victoria for many, many years, just raising up really, really key leaders. And so I'm just honoured to be preaching in front of legends like Pastor Ron Mallon and just some great people. I've had the privilege of getting to know Jeremy and Jacinta, Pastor Jeremy and Jacinta for the last few years, and I love what is on your life, your heart, and I'm very excited about the future for Generations Church. Under your leadership and obviously the guidance of the Spirit. And then, I've got like former and even some current students who are in, Jacinta, which is fantastic. So proud of just who you've become and what God is doing in your life. She was always an excellent student, can I just say. It might surprise you, but she was. Keely, I met her yesterday and she was like, hey, you're one of my lecturers. I'm like, whoa, that just kind of threw me. I'm sorry about that. And I've got some friends here from my church, Faith. So Johnny and Rose, I don't know, there they are. Hey, fantastic. It's so good. Johnny was part of my youth ministry and he was a troublemaker back then as well. And great. I've got Ryan and Mel Hudson. They are new to your church, and just what a joy to have them with us. Ryan was on my youth leadership team back in the day, a long time ago. Makes me feel old. Thank you. It's just an honour, honestly, just to be with you, and really do feel like I'm home amongst family. If you're new here with us, we hope that you feel at home. We want to welcome you. It's great to have you here. If you're unfamiliar with church, we're even more thrilled that you're here. I know what it's like to step into an environment where it's familiar to everybody else but you, and it kind of feels a little bit uncomfortable. Sometimes it helps to have somebody that just can explain some of the things that don't make total sense for you. So let me be that person for you. The church is not a building. The church is the people that have responded to the extravagant invitation of God for new life. And we are taken up by that invitation. And we gather together, usually on a Sunday. When we come together, we usually honour God and respond to the grace that He has given us. And we usually do that through song. That's an appropriate way of doing that. We come and focus our attention on God, and we pray for one another. And we give. All of those are expressions of our worship, which is simply just ascribing worth to someone, and God is worthy. And then we turn our attention to the Christian scriptures. It's an ancient text, but we believe it's a unique text. We believe it's inspired by God. We believe that if we tune our ear to it, that God will speak to you. He reveals something of Himself, of His nature. He reveals something maybe about you, maybe about the situations that you're facing. And so we usually set some time in the service to listen to someone read some scripture and share some reflections, and we believe that in that moment, God speaks. So for the next 1.5 to 2 hours, we're just going to turn our attention. For those of you who are unfamiliar with church, that was a joke. We'll see what the Lord does, hey? Hey, as a preacher, sometimes we don't have the freedom to preach whatever we want to. This is my first time gathered with you here, and I'm excited about the future of Generations Church and what God wants to do. But sometimes as a preacher, you've just got to preach out of the season that you're in. And this is going to be one of those times. This message is probably going to be a little raw, maybe a little bit challenging. Maybe a little bit challenging about the way that you maybe see God. And so at the outset, I just want to call out courage to be honest about you and where you're at, and humility to maybe hear something that is not necessarily, it might not align with what you see. In a congregation of this size, I am sure there are people who have faced or are now just facing difficult things in life, burdens that you carry that maybe other people don't know about. It's just difficult to comprehend. The truth is that life is full of challenges. It doesn't change when you decide to orient your life around Jesus. In fact, the New Testament seems to indicate that sometimes it gets worse when you do that. God's plan for people, both corporately as well as individually, is that you flourish in life, that you live a life where things are good horizontally and vertically. I'm getting my horizontal and vertical wrong, but thank you. Lindsay, was it? Thank you. He desires that that's what happens in life, but it's not his prime concern. His prime concern is not that your life is without challenge. His prime concern is you are faithful to him even in the midst of that challenge. In the midst of heartache and hardship, we can often ask questions of God. Questions like, where are you? When are you going to show up? When will you step in and right all these wrongs? Has anyone else been there? Great. I was hoping it wasn't just me. Well, if you haven't been there, just hang on. It's coming as a word of encouragement for you. I want to wrestle with you today over the question, where is God in times of turmoil? Now, there's a prophetic book in the Old Testament that asks these questions almost verbatim. All we're going to do with our time together is try to embed ourselves in this story, to listen in on a conversation that this person has with God, and what we can learn from it today in the midst of our questions. Now, this is not going to give you everything that you need to know about facing the difficult times in your life, but I believe it's going to give you a solid foundation to keep going without giving up. And so, let me read to you the opening words of the book of Habakkuk. How long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? Or cry out to you violence, but you do not save? I love that honesty. Habakkuk is a prophet, a spokesperson for God, a messenger. The idea of being a prophet is that you hear God and you deliver that message to people. Oftentimes, more often than not, the message was for a group of people, corporate, plural. Oftentimes the people of Israel. But oftentimes it was also for specific individuals. And so that's what his job is, his calling, so to speak. But here is a person that has been called by God for a specific work, and we are introduced to him in one of those moments of brutal honesty, those moments when we're away from any people that we feel the need to impress, maybe when we are behind closed doors at home, and we allow ourselves to voice what we really think. And what Habakkuk really thinks is that God doesn't seem to be doing his job. Habakkuk is experiencing tension between his concept of how God should behave and the way in which God actually behaves. I just love the honesty of God's word. It doesn't hide the frustrations of the human experience. It exposes our failings, our faults. It exposes our hurts, our happiness, our doubts, our dreams, or all our devastation. It shows it all and it says, hey, here is the human experience. This is what you can expect to experience in life. And this is important because we need to learn that unless we can be honest with ourselves, with God, we can never have an authentic relationship. Honesty is one of the bedrock foundations of having a genuine relationship. One way that we can be honest is through lament. A lament is a painful expression of sorrow or grief or despair in times of crisis, and it draws attention to what is wrong in the world, or what is specifically wrong with your world, and asks God to intervene in that, to do something about it. Some people can struggle with the idea of being honest with God, being brutally honest. The reality is, we can be honest that we are unhappy with the way that he is ruling. Because the reality is, he already knows you have those thoughts, so why hide them? The scriptures show us time and time again, they give us examples of how lament can be a pathway towards being honest with God. If you were to categorize all the Psalms, all 150 of them, into a pie chart, the majority of them would be Psalms of lament. We often think about Psalms as the book of praise, and it is, but it's actually far more than that. And the majority of the Psalms, as you read them, are actually Psalms of lament, where somebody is wrestling with the tension of life and saying, God, this is not right. When are you going to come in? Here in Habakkuk, we have another example. One scholar writes that laments and questioning are God's gift to the believer. They provide a pathway of honest faith and faithful conversation with him in horrible times. So my encouragement to you is don't hide your lament. God welcomes it. Now you can't live there. You cannot live there. Living in the land of lament for too long will embitter your soul and make you unhealthy. But sometimes it is necessary to camp there. You can tell when lament becomes unhealthy, in part because of the language that we use. When it is unhealthy, God is talked about in the abstract. You hear it in questions like, how could God allow such and such to happen? How could God? When lament is healthy, God is not treated as an abstract concept. God is included in the question. It is a conversation. Instead of how could God allow, it is God, how could you allow? Because you're inviting God into that space and you're being honest before him. Listen again to Habakkuk's lament. How long, Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen, or cry out to you violence, but you do not save? Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds. Therefore, the law is paralyzed and justice never prevails. The wicked hem in the righteous so that justice is perverted. Let me explain what's happening. Habakkuk's community, the southern kingdom of Israel, is corrupt, and he's railing against the injustice, the wrong, and the destruction, and the violence, and the strife, and the conflict that exists. Habakkuk describes a society that's full of crime and violence and corruption and the defeat of the righteous. It is a society that is ruined, and the prophet wants to know why God tolerates the flourishing of such wickedness. It's not bad enough that his nation is corrupt and injustice thrives and people are destroying each other. What's worse is God's not doing anything about it. God is seemingly silent and inactive. And the question arises, God, where are you? And some of us hear Habakkuk's question, and it sounds very similar because we've asked similar questions. Truth is that we are surrounded by injustice. Speed cameras set up on a downhill road. That thing that you've been wanting to purchase for so long, and you save up and you purchase it, and the next week it goes on sale. Yeah, that thing that you've been longing to eat and you left it in the fridge and you are like all day at work, you're thinking about it. And you're like, man, I cannot wait to get home. And you get home, you open it, and it's gone. And your spouse has eaten it. Unjust. Maybe it's just me. Habakkuk's turmoil was that he was in a ruined society full of violence and injustice. Now, that may not be yours. It might be. Maybe you're in a workplace that is similar to that. I don't know. It might not be your situation, but insert your turmoil and pain here. And your situation often calls for the same questions. There's terminal illness, or even just chronic illness. Struggling marriage, unbearable work pressures, financial despair, relational conflict that's just tearing you apart. Whether it's you or someone that is close to you, these burdens just weigh so heavily. A different situation than Habakkuk, but same questions. How long till you do something about this, God? Where are you? Well, God does respond. Verse 5, look at the nations and watch, and be utterly amazed, for I am going to do something in your days that you would not believe even if you were told. Oh, that's awesome. That sounds promising. Okay, well, let's keep reading. I'm raising up the Babylonians, the ruthless and impetuous people who sweep across the whole earth to seize dwellings not their own. They are feared and dreaded people. They're a law to themselves and promote their own honor. And it goes on and talks about how ruthless and strong the Babylonians are. God's response, if I can summarize, is yes, Judah are wicked, violence and injustice prevail. So I am going to set them straight by bringing the Babylonians against them. And they are fierce. I will deal with my corrupt people by sending an even more corrupt people to deal with them. That's not exactly good news. Like if I was Habakkuk, I'd be like struck dumb. Like, sorry, God, did I just hear you correctly? It's not exactly what Habakkuk wants to hear. Let me give you a bit of the context. Israel are in slavery, the family of Abraham. They've been in slavery to Egypt. God brings them out and he covenants with them. That's a formal contract that binds two or more parties together. And so they commit themselves to being his representatives among the nations. Being in relationship with God, being in covenant with God, means that you're going to act a certain way. And the way that they lived is going to showcase his glory and his nature to the nations. So Israel commits themselves. They say, we will commit ourselves to following you, and if not, you will drive us out of this land. And God says, at this point, well, the time has come to remove my protection from you. The consequences of your decision over many, many, many years where you refuse to uphold your end of covenant. And tragically, that means I'm going to allow the Babylonians to have free reign with you. So Habakkuk's response is like, sorry? Like, really? Them? The Babylonians? Like, haven't you heard the reports of how brutal they can be? Let me read to you chapter 1, verse 13. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrongdoing. Why do you tolerate the treacherous? Why then are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves? It's a genuine question. And again, God answers in chapter 2. Let me summarize God's response. They're not going to get away either. They, the Babylonians, they do heinous things to those that they conquer, and they will be judged for it. And then God paints this vivid picture for much of chapter 2 of how the nations that the Babylonians have brought low will taunt and scoff at Babylon after her downfall. In essence, God is saying, hey, I understand your grievance, and it's bad. My people that are called by my name, that have said that they will represent me to the nations, are acting in ways that are completely contrary to my nature. They are unjust and they're destroying each other. And it is bad, but I will deal with it in my time and my way. You don't have to worry. I get that you are in turmoil, but I'm in charge. I've got this. I've got this. As at the end of chapter 2, Habakkuk has this beautiful phrase. It just says, "The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him." It's this recognition that God is in charge, that God is sovereign, that he's wise, and that he knows what he is doing, that he will take care of it. The word for be silent can be pronounced hush. Hush. I've got this. I've got this. In the midst of our turmoil, we need to hear God say those words to us. There's still some questions. God's response was not particularly comforting to Habakkuk, and so we can question, all right, God, you've got this, you're sovereign, you're in control, sure, but what about me? And what about my pain? And can I trust you even in the midst of what I'm going through? Well, to answer this, I think one of the best answers is for us to fast forward in history several hundred years, and we arrive in a small room in a small village in the Judean countryside. The room, pungent with the smell of animals who have been brought in for the night. The room is noisy because there's a very young woman giving birth. And giving birth is usually not a silent ordeal. It's noisy because there's a baby boy that's just been born. And the voice of the baby crying, contrary to the Christmas carols, is the voice of God. The God who is sovereign and fearsome and in charge in the book of Habakkuk is the God who clothed himself in human flesh, who stepped into the human experience not as a mighty ruler, but as a helpless newborn. Jesus. His name means God saves. Jesus lived a mundane human life. He did chores. He learned to trade. He worked very hard for very little. He paid exorbitant taxes to the Romans. He had to deal with the death of his earthly father. He left his career to become a traveling teacher, a rabbi. He served the poor and the destitute and the overlooked. He had to live through the execution of his relative, John the Baptist. He was betrayed by one of his closest associates for money and was abandoned by his closest friends and was finally executed at the hands of the state in one of the most dehumanizing and painful ways ever conceived of, crucifixion. The God who is fierce and mighty and in charge is the God who willingly stepped into the human experience and willingly chose death for you and for me. I turn, can God be trusted in your turmoil? Well, I turn to the words of one of my favorite novelists, Stephen Lawhead. In his novel Byzantium, the main character, who's a monk called Aidan, historical figure, history knows him as St. Aidan of Lindsey Farn. Aidan experiences great hardship and he feels betrayed by God and he despairs of life. And though his life is eventually spared, he decides to just leave his calling in the monastery because he's like, God has abandoned me, so I will abandon him. And then a few days later, it's Easter, and he attends the Easter service because that's what monks do. And he has this revelation as he reflects on the incarnation of Jesus Christ, God clothing himself in human flesh. And he realizes that Jesus experienced all the things that he did and more. Let me end with you. Spoiler alert. It's one of the last paragraphs of the book. But let me read to you the words, and they're up on the screen. This is Aidan talking to himself, and he says, sure, this is the heart of the great mystery, that God became man, shouldering the weight of suffering so that on the final day, none could say, who are you to judge the world? What do you know of injustice? What do you know of torture, of sickness, of poverty? How dare you call yourself a righteous God? What do you know of death? Well, he knows, Aidan, he knows. Can God be trusted in your turmoil? Yes. Yes, he can. A resounding yes. He has lived through it all. He's experienced betrayal. He's experienced pain. He's experienced death. He knows. And even in the midst of your difficulty and hardship and pain, he can be trusted. It's actually even more significant than just the fact that God has entered the human experience. The New Testament actually takes this idea of God's sovereignty and the question of what God is going to do with the injustice of the world in a remarkably new direction. It led one scholar to say the defeat of injustice and ungodliness does not occur in a demonstration of superior military power, which is what we see in Habakkuk's day, but through God allowing violence done to himself. The supreme expression of human injustice, the brutal execution of Jesus on a Roman cross, is the beginning of the end of all injustice. Christ was raised from the dead, and he will come again. And one day he will put every injustice to right. He will put this world to right. But it began when he willingly took on the sin and the injustice of the world. So where is God in the midst of your turmoil? Well, in turmoil, he is there and he cares and he is in control. And that, in large measure, is the message of Habakkuk. Now, because it's a bit of a conversation, let me recap with you the whole of Habakkuk. And because it's a conversation, I thought, how can I do it in a way that kind of makes sense to us? Well, let me do it in the form of an SMS text message. So, here we go. First of all, Habakkuk says, "Oh Lord, how long till you step in and do something? Why aren't you listening?" But listening. Wait till you see how I deal with them. Have you heard about the Babylonians? Really? Them? The Babylonians? Teary emoji. Hush! I've got this. Strong arm emoji. Okay. In my turmoil, you are there and care and in control. That's Habakkuk. Now, let's come back to today. Reflecting on all this, like, so what? What does this mean for you and for me when we're facing our own turmoil? I want to end with one idea and then 3 actionable things that you and I can do to help us. Here's the idea. In our turmoil, turn to, not away from God. And trust. And trust. Habakkuk is such an inspiration for me. From start to finish, he turns to God. He brings his grievous complaint to God. God doesn't even seem to answer his direct question, but the implication is that he will answer it. It's not exactly what he wants to hear. But that just causes him what? To turn to God afresh. And then God responds. H takes God at his work and then at his word, and then constructs this beautiful song in chapter 3 as an expression of trust. In our turmoil, turn to, not away from God, and trust. What would it look like for you and I to turn to God in trust? Let me give you 3 very quick ideas about things that we can practically do in the midst of our turmoil to express our trust in God. The first is to remember. To remember. Habakkuk remembers. Chapter 3 is a psalm or a hymn that Habakkuk writes where he's trying to come to grips with what God has said. One of the things that he does is he remembers and he reflects on what God has done for Israel in the past. And in particular, he's thinking about the Exodus. Habakkuk chapter 3, verse 2, he says, Lord, I've heard of your fame. I stand in awe of your deeds. Lord, repeat them in our day. In our time, make them known. And in wrath, remember mercy. My question to you is, what has God done for you in the past? Now, Habakkuk reflects on the Exodus. The New Testament paints the cross of Jesus and what that won for us as a new Exodus. So the first place, I think, for you and I to reflect on is what we did this morning during communion, reflecting on the cross. What has Jesus done for you and for me in the cross and in the resurrection? Christos Victor, the one who is victorious. We need to reflect on that. But even beyond that, for your own life, what has God already done for you? If he's been faithful in the past, he'll be faithful today and he'll be faithful tomorrow. So remind yourself what God has done. Remember, you have my permission to stop listening to me right now as I go on with the next 2 points and just write down, this is what God has done for me. This is what God has done for me. This is what God has done for me. And let that stir your faith. The second thing that you and I can do, for those of you who are still listening, is we can worship. When we remember what God has done, it leads to an expression of trust. And that just leads to worship. What he hears from God is not what he wants to hear, but he remembers who he's dealing with. He remembers that God knows and can be trusted. And even beyond that, he remembers who God is and that God is enough. Some of the most meaningful words from the book of Habakkuk are these words in verse 17. It's written on my dad's tombstone. It was one of his favorite scriptures. Though the fig tree does not bud, and there are no grapes on the vines, though the olive crop fails and the fields produce no food, though there are no sheep in the pen and no cattle in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in God, my Savior. He's enough. God is enough. Even when everything is going wrong. And in that type of society, for all that tough stuff to happen, and you have lost it all and you've got nothing, even when everything just seems at a loss, yet we can worship because he's proven his love towards us and he is enough. So what I want to encourage you to do is worship. Habakkuk's name means embrace, especially as a means of keeping warm when there's no shelter. So that idea of just kind of cuddling up. My encouragement to you is learn to embrace God even in the midst of your turmoil. Let worship begin to flow. There's other stuff I can say. Let me just end on this last one, to wait. The third thing we can do is wait. Verse 16, I heard and my heart pounded, my lips quivered at the sound, decay crept into my bones and my legs trembled. Like he's genuinely facing the fear of what God has said. Yet I will wait patiently for the day of calamity to come on the nation that is invading us. He does this numerous times in the text where he says, I'm just going to wait. Chapter 2, verse 1, it's not on the slides. I will stand at my watch and station myself on the ramparts, and I will look to see what God will say to me. He's sitting there waiting. Verse 3 of chapter 2, it says, for the revelation awaits an appointed time. It speaks of the end. It will not prove false. Though it linger, wait for it. It will certainly come and will not delay. If God has said something to you, you wait for it. You wait with trust. You wait with worship. You wait remembering his faithfulness towards you. You wait and believe that God will come through. Situations and difficulty and hardship may come against us, and we don't ignore that. We will lament before God. God intervene, fix this situation. And he gives us the strength that we need to go through it. I love, again, not on the slides, but the way that Habakkuk finishes. He says, the sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer. He enables me to tread on the heights. Those difficult, hard to reach places, God is the one that gives us the strength even in the midst of those situations. We can withstand those periods because we have the Lord. And yet in that, we can wait. If I can just invite the worship team to come on up. In the midst of my turmoil, in the midst of your turmoil, he is there and he cares and he is in control. My encouragement to you is to turn to and not away from God in the midst. Two groups of people that I just want to pray for today. The first, you may be in here and you don't know Jesus. You don't have a relationship with him. Let me read to you from the book of Acts. Habakkuk is actually referenced several times in the New Testament. It's a profound book that some of the themes and the ideas are picked up several times. Let me read to you one of those times. There's two Jewish blokes, Paul and Barnabas, and they're invited to speak a word of exhortation at a synagogue in Antioch. It's a gathering of Jews. Paul unpacks Israel's story and points to the promise of a future anointed king and the fact that God has fulfilled that promise for this king, for the Messiah, or in Greek, the Christ, in Jesus. And proof of the fact that he was the king was God raising him from the dead. And so this is what Paul says. Therefore, my friends, I want you to know that through Jesus, the forgiveness of sins is proclaimed to you. Through him, everyone who believes is set free from every sin. A justification you were not able to obtain under the law of Moses. You cannot obtain freedom from sin, from your both brokenness within you and the brokenness that you perpetuate. You can't do it in your own strength. Take care then that what the prophets have said does not happen to you. And then here he quotes Habakkuk, look, you scoffers, wonder and perish, for I am going to do something in your days that you would never believe, even if you were told. That was pointing to Jesus and the fact that God became man, died on a cross, was resurrected from the dead to open a new way for you to know the Father, for you to receive forgiveness, for you to receive new life. It's available to you. So my challenge to you from that verse is simply this. Don't be a scoffer, but instead surrender. I want to, if I can just ask every eye to close and every head to bow. If you're here in this place and you don't know Jesus, can I encourage you that here in this moment is your opportunity to respond, your opportunity not to scoff, but to surrender, to say, okay, Jesus, if you are the king, if you are in charge, if you are the person that can forgive me, that can give me new life, then I'm willing to respond. Now, all I'm going to do is ask that you raise your hand. I'll see it. We'll pray together. But if that's you, on the count of 3, can I invite you just to raise your hand? 1, 2, 3. Is there anyone here today? You don't know Jesus, but you're willing today to say, yep, I want to respond. Lord, if there is anyone in this room, and perhaps they're not ready yet, I pray, Spirit of God, that you would reveal yourself to them. May they see Jesus and hear his call, compelling them to respond. Thank you. Next group of people, I wonder if we could stand to our feet. I want to know if there's anyone in this room who just, you've come today, you've listened to the message, maybe it's just brought up questions from your past, maybe it's stuff that you've gone through that you just haven't been able to understand or comprehend. It's just a burden that you carry. I'd love to pray for you. Some of you, you're currently going through things. Might not be massive, but there's just stuff that you're going through that you are just finding difficult to walk through. I'd love to pray for you. That not only does God strengthen us to walk through that, he also does intervene. Oh, I don't know why he doesn't do it when I ask, when I would want him to. Sometimes it just takes a journey. But he does. So for those of you that would like prayer, I want to pray. Pray for breakthrough, because I believe that God is a God of breakthrough. It's one of his names in the Old Testament. But also, just pray for God's strength, that he will enable your feet to be like the feet of the deer that can stand in very difficult places and not have any issues. So we are just going to worship. And if you're here and you would like prayer, maybe, as I said, stuff from your past, or maybe it's stuff you're going through now, you just want to encounter God, I want to invite you to come to the front as we sing, and we'll pray together. Just allow God to do what he wants to do in your heart. So, if that's you, step out. Lily, why don't you lead us? Thanks.
Let's worship him.